Hello everyone, my name is Jason Ramirez and welcome to the Hit List Podcast, a podcast where me and a guest cross out films from our watch list and discuss them. This is Season 5, Episode 10, and today I'm joined by editor and producer Tu Tía Bruja, Bex Carlos. Welcome Bex, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me on, Jason. I love movies, so I'm super excited to be here.
So before we get started, I have a couple questions for you. My first question, I ask everyone on the show. What are your viewing habits? When you sit down to watch a movie, do you stick to your favorites or do you watch something new?
So I don't feel like I always have the attention span to watch new things. I think that that's sort of a curse that I'm dealing with. But I do really like rewatching things, and I think that it's nice to see things with like a new set of eyes. And so sometimes you catch things that you don't like catch the first time or the second time. And I also read recently that that's like a sign of anxiety because you know what's coming. So I'm like,
Yeah, definitely. My second question for you is, what's something about you that people wouldn't know?
That probably I'm an introvert. I work in audio. I talk a lot. I a lot of my work revolves talking to people, but I really find the most like comfort when I'm by myself and can recharge.
I think people get the same thing about me. I remember one time when I was still an undergrad, I told someone like, "Yeah, I'm an introvert," and she's like, "Wait, but you're so able to do like a presentation, whatever." I'm like, "Yeah, because I rehearse. I rehearse that. Every single speech I give, I rehearse so I don't look like an idiot." But apparently, no one else does it. No one else I went to school with rehearsed. I guess they just like, "Oh, I'm just gonna wing it." No, no, no. It's not just a speech. It's practice, sir. Practice, ma'am. Practice, friend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, and honestly, it's important to practice. Like, I think that there are people who can totally wing it and
Oh yeah.
they're very talented in that way, but I at least have to have notes or an outline of what I'm trying to
Yeah.
say. Otherwise, it's all jumbled and I just feel like I make no points or I go on tangents.
Yeah, that's something I have a habit of doing on this podcast. I'm trying to cut that down. So lately, I've been doing a better job, both in producing this, as in like recording this, and also in post production, where we go off on huge tangents, but you're not going to hear it because it's not related to the podcast.
Yeah.
Speaking of podcasts, let's get back to this one, which is a film discussion one called the Hit List Podcast. Today, we're going to be discussing Volver. Volver is a 2006 Spanish comedy drama film written and directed by Pedro Almodovar. Revolving around an eccentric family of women from a windswept region south of Madrid, Penelope Cruz stars as Ramonda, a working class woman forced to go to great lengths to protect her 14-year-old daughter, Paula. To top off the family crisis, her mother Irene returns from the dead to tie up loose ends. The film features an ensemble cast that includes Penelope Cruz, Carmen Maura, Lola Dueñas, Blanca Portillo, Johanna Cobo, and Chus Lamprev. This film was on Bex's watch list. Bex, why was this film on your list?
Okay, so I've been very into my like years that I was in college and just processing a lot of that stuff. And I took an international film class, and it was actually one of the films we were supposed to watch. And typically, I was so good at doing my homework and being on top of stuff, but for whatever reason, that's the one film I didn't watch. So I was like, this is my redemption arc. Like, this is finally, this is finally doing something I was supposed to do. And also, I just really love Pedro Almodovar, like his films, like I love that the constant themes of like strong women and like weak or just very like undesirable men, like their character traits and stuff. And you definitely see that in this one as well.
Right, right. That's something I also noticed as well. And this isn't my first introduction to him. It's the first movie I've seen of him. But my film professor from my community college, who happens to have his own podcast and I used to promote it, he did an episode on Parallel Mothers, which is another Pedro Almodovar movie that came out, I believe, in 2021, that also starred Penelope Cruz. And that's what kind of got the director's work in my radar. And speaking of like the film class, I took only one, and I think that was just enough for me because literally your homework is to watch a movie, right? Your homework is to watch a movie for like one movie a week, write down what you thought about it, write down like what you learned or whatever, and then go to class for a discussion, and that was it. That was it.
Yeah.
And it's kind of hard to miss a movie for like 1 week. I missed one, but it was literally the last week of school, and it was for The Matrix, and I'd already seen that so many times. So I was like, you know what, that's fine. But I like how this is your redemption arc, Bex.
Yeah. Thanks. You allowed it to happen.
So what did you think?
So it's interesting, right? Because I feel like the movie that I was expecting was very different than what I got. In the sense that for whatever reason, I think that I had thought that it was like the whole kind of dysfunctional family was going to help her in like the process and hiding, and like there are definitely scenes where you like, oh, like the strength of all these women coming together to help each other, and you definitely do see that, but it was very different than what I expected. And I feel like kind of in the same way as like I needed a redemption arc, like I feel like it only really makes sense. Everything makes sense until the last like 20 minutes of the film. And then you're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
that's what," and I do like that. I do like films that have kind of a slow burn and like, yeah, you're enjoying a lot of different parts of it, but then it all kind of like makes sense. And that's definitely what I got with that. Like with Raimunda, like you understand, like once you kind of understand her history, like, oh, that's why you were so quick to not even ask questions when that
Mm-hmm.
happened to your daughter, like you just jumped into action. And I mean, there were a lot of like things that I found that amusing, right? Like the fact that her sister's name is Soledad and she's alone all the time. Like that was not lost on me. Like there's so many things that were just so in your face, but until it was explained, you're like, oh shit, like that's so funny.
Yeah, I saw the trailer right before watching the movie. I didn't know what to expect either. And I think that's kind of what's the great part about this movie. The trailer did a very good job of not revealing anything. You kind of know that her mother returns from the dead, but you're not sure exactly how and in what way. Even the daughters are confused. Like, so are you like a zombie, or oh, you never died? and then revealing like the stories that someone discussed, like a backstory, is connected to like what's happening in the overall. And the thing I like about this movie, there's a lot of things I like about this movie. Spoiler alert, I really like this movie. um, it reminded me of this show called Pushing Daisies. Have you ever seen that show?
Yes, I love that show. Yeah.
It had like that fairy tale essence to it, I guess, because of the color and because the cast was so good, because like it just I'm gonna quote Harry Styles right here. It just felt like a movie.
Yeah.
And the second thing I really like about this movie is that there's enough material here to have two different movies, right? Because there's the plot line of Ramonda trying to protect her daughter from going to jail, and there's a second plot line of Ramonda's mother coming back from the dead and hiding from her because she doesn't want to upset her, and she's trying to like tie up loose ends. That's enough material to have two different movies, but somehow Pedro made it work. I don't know how he did it, but I respect him for it. All the more.
Yeah. No, and I'm really glad that you said that because that's so true. This could have been easily two films if they would have wanted it to be. And throughout the course, until you kind of like find out why the estrangement between mother and daughter, right? Like you're sort of like, why is it so difficult for her to show? She's shown herself to the granddaughter. She's shown herself to her other daughter. She shows herself to all these strangers. Like, so you're kind of just like, well, what is going on? So then when you find out, you're like, that makes so much sense. Of course, like, of course, you're here to make amends. And there's also like, I think as a parent, I'm not a parent, but just, thinking, I'm sure it's hard at times when you fucked up and you should have been there, to like then have to like own up, take accountability, and whatever happens, happens, right? Like that was something that I was just like, people, our parents are people. And, I've been thinking about this a lot too. Our parents are people and they did the best with what they could and what they knew.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. It's sort of just one of those. It's like, well, at least my family's not that dysfunctional,
Yeah, that's something that I also realized as I grown older. Like my parents would say, like, people are like talking really good about you, and it makes us proud of you. And I feel like we did a pretty good job. I'm like, I think pretty talking really mighty about yourselves, huh? But as I've seen other people grow up into the adults that they became, and I see how they raise their own children, I'm like, oh, I guess they did do a pretty good job of what they had and what they knew. Like as much as like stuff's not working out for me, I think I turned out all right. Like just a little bit, you know?
Sometimes it takes perspective too. Like I feel like the older I get and the more I hang out with a lot of my extended family, because we're the first generation in the United States on my mom's side. So whenever I hang out with like a lot of them, I'm like, oh wow, like it could have been so much worse, you know? And because it's just, people do the best with what they have and the opportunities they have. And some people are okay with what they have, like they don't want to seek out more. And I don't know, I think it's just people are complicated. That's what I keep figuring out.
Yeah, and that's why I a long time ago I stopped thinking like, man, if only my dad did went to that job instead of this job, we wouldn't have struggled. But thing is, he couldn't predict the future. No one can. You know, it's like the same thing as saying like, man, if only I invested in Bitcoin 5 years ago, I would have been a million right now. Well, you didn't
Right.
know that at the time. You know, like you thought Bitcoin was just like a toy that you got out the internet. You didn't know. You know, and you did what you could with what you knew. Yeah, that's just a little life lesson for you guys. From
Yeah, sometimes
yeah.
dropping wisdom.
So, what else did you like about this movie? I think the third thing I really liked about this movie is that it's all women, and the men barely had any lines at all. And it was like a refresher for me, you know?
Yeah, well, so that was something I really enjoyed, and I'm gonna assume that you're of Hispanic or Latin heritage because of your last name and whatnot, but I don't know. I think that sometimes, right, like because I'm Mexican American and you don't always think about like yeah, we got the language and stuff from the Spanish, but it's like what else did we get from them? And you see that like that strong mother figure, like the focus on family and like you see a lot of those parallels. So I feel like it was really interesting. It's like, yeah, okay, well, like this is something we also got from the Spanish. And you had mentioned earlier as well the color. It's such a colorful film.
hmm
For such a dark movie,
Oh
it's
yeah,
just so well illuminated.
yeah. I've made this same complaint over and over again on this podcast. How modern movies, I guess movies that have been happening in like the past decade and this decade as well, because they're so worried about being released on time and on budget, they don't incorporate the use of extras as much anymore as they used to. And
Mhm.
that's another thing I like about this movie. It feels lived in, you know? It feels like the real world because they use extras in this film. They use actual locations, and the extras aren't just like standing around doing nothing. They're actually incorporating them into the scene so that it feels like an actual community. And I think the other movie that's done this that I've noticed because it was just so good was Jaws. Like, if you've seen that movie, when the sheriff is driving around through town, when he goes into the general store, when he goes everywhere, the people in that town feel like an actual community of people. They're having like conversations that like people in a small town would have, like, "Hey, what happened to my rake? Where's my rake?" You know, I don't think they said something like that in Jaws, but I think you know what I mean. It's
Yeah,
just
yeah.
the use of extras right here was done very well, and it felt like it was an actual lived-in world. You know, it didn't feel hollow. You know.
Yeah, and a scene that really incorporates that, or how like the extras kind of kept everything going, were the scenes with Raimunda working at the restaurant.
Yes.
Because it's like this becomes okay, like I'm working here, whatever, whatever, and like you see the people interacting, the crew after every day that like filming has ended for this like film crew, and they really help like move the story along. You have people like and it just seems like a very authentic experience. Like people are playing instruments and people are doing that. And I will say that that's something I learned to appreciate through that class is like most of the time, more often than not, European cinema is a lot more focused in the storytelling, how it looks, like uh all of the mise en scène, if you will, to bring out some of those terms. Like it's a lot more thought out. Whereas like here in the United States, like because of Hollywood, and it just seems like it's profit, 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 like
Yep,
bottom
yep,
line.
yep.
There's so many things that are missed. Like I can't tell you the number of times I've seen a film and I start like almost like a tally of all the times that like things don't add up. Like this person was like, how could they be doing that? Or that's not continuous, you know? And I'm just like, oh my God, I almost wish that someone would give me a job, like to be like, you did this in a different episode, like be the person who takes notes. Like in shows too, I especially notice that. Like, I don't know through like just someone, you know, dropping the ball or
I
not
think it's like a
realizing it.
script
It's
supervisor. I think that's the name of the job, script supervisor.
Yeah, but it just seems like sometimes certain continuity things like aren't followed through, and it's just like whoever it is dropping the ball, you know? Like it just seems like you're not following the story close enough. If I have only seen it like two or three times and I'm not working that close and I can notice where you dropped it, how can't you, you know? But I guess that's not a fair assessment because there's so many things happening on a
Yeah,
movie set, you
yeah,
know, that it's hard to keep track.
yeah. And I completely understand that as a filmmaker myself. There have been times where like I messed up. I'm like, oh, why didn't I catch that? It's because there's so many things going on, and it doesn't get better with a bigger budget with more people involved in the crew because that's just more people to manage, you know. But
Yeah.
it does get funny sometimes with some shows, like with Game of Thrones, when that coffee cup was still left there in the shot, and it looked like Daenerys Targaryen went to Starbucks because she had the coffee cup. It was like right there. It was right there. And then later on, once it was after it aired, the day after, they removed it in post, so you can't see it anymore. Like when it airs, but I just find it so hilarious. Where like those small things get caught. Second one is like when that sound guy was shown in The Mandalorian. He was like behind a door. He has like a gray t-shirt and jeans. He's just like behind the door. You don't see his face, but you see him in the shot.
Sure. But I guess like, you know, it's just one of those things like you said, there's so many things going on, like it's hard to keep track of everything. But it just seems so strange to me too because typically when things are filmed, they're filmed with like different angles, so you would think at some point you would catch it. But, you know, what do I know?
Yeah. Who was your favorite character in this film?
Um, I think I really enjoyed Agustina. I like because she knew that something was up, right? And she's just trying so hard. And I mean, she makes some questionable choices, you know, to try and like uncover that. Like, I will say that the whole being on that show was sort of out of left field because I know she had
Yeah.
talked about like, oh, they want to talk to you about potentially being on this show, but the way that it sounded was more of like a news outlet as opposed to like a trashy TV talk
Yeah.
show kind of thing. So that was sort of like very unexpected. And then the fact that instead of like, I think she also realized like, I can't really do this because if I do this, it's going to ruin my relationship with these people. And she just like walks off. But I really liked her character. Also, I'm a big stoner myself, so I always feel like I bond. And so the fact that she's like, "Do you want some?" and they're like, "No." She's like, "I grew it myself. You know, it's great." And I'm just like, "Oh my God, that's me. That's me." Always a pusher.
Yeah, she was a really good character. I really liked her. I didn't think she would have like that big of a role. I thought she would just be like their neighbor, and then she wouldn't be in as involved. But you kind of learned that it was a small town that they grew up in, you know, and
Yeah.
everyone knows each other, and so she's actually a large part in the story. I would say my favorite character, because I'm a guy, I really liked Raimonda. Not just because of her looks, but because Penelope Cruz did such a good job with her, and I guess because I have some sort of attachment to Penelope Cruz because she was in Nacho Libre, and I've watched that movie so many times since I was a kid, and I just love seeing her like play like a different character than I'm used to, and she did a really good job with that. The way she was so committed to protecting her daughter because she went through something very similar as well. Ah, loved it.
Oh no, she definitely sold that character. Like it's not that she's not my favorite for because like you said, Penelope Cruz is great. She's very believable in that role. She's very likable in that role because
Yeah,
even though all of this is like happening, you sympathize with her, you get it, and then at the end, you totally like you're like, well, fuck yeah, of course. Like I don't know. I think that that was something that really changed my opinion of her too, because it's like you see that like without asking any questions, she's like, Paula, I got you, you know, like
right.
and that's awesome. But then when it kind of makes sense, it's like, well, you're doing it because I'm a big fan of the saying, be who you needed when you were younger. And she
Mm.
was being that for her daughter. She needed a mom who like listened to her and like, was going to protect her. And she did that.
Yeah, I just remember that. Like, duh, of course, you're right. She needed, yeah, she definitely needed a mom when that happened, and then she became that mom. So she did. That's like some growth. You happy? Growth.
Yeah. Did you notice one thing that I pointed out that they had talked about just very briefly, how the town, the little pueblo that they were from, had the highest rate of insanity?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Like her,
yeah.
yeah, I thought that was hilarious. And I was like, that's so funny because like the theme of like mental health and like stuff like that is definitely a theme in a lot of his like films. So I'm like, oh, that's
Really?
funny.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, he has another film that's called Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown.
Hmm.
And just sort of it's interesting, right? Because like recently I was talking to a psychiatrist and a thing that a lot of Latin people share, Spanish people too, that we share is that like when someone goes to seek mental health treatment, or whatever, they will ask them, "Oh, do you have a family member? Do you have someone in the family member, family member that's kind of off?" And they're like, "No." Well, actually, now that I think about it, and there's always that one loco or loca, and they're like, they're single. They didn't really like do like a whole lot. They stayed very close to home, like they're whatever, whatever, and all these things. And I was just like, "Oh, so we all have that." So I just thought that that was like I'm a big like divine timing and things are supposed to happen when they happen. So it was like I had that recording and then I watched the movie. I was like, oh shit. I guess that is something that we a lot of us share.
It's like when you're younger and you hear all these stories about family members that like kind of like went off the deep end or they did something that's like out of character or something. You just wonder like, wait, why? And then you grow older and you see a pattern, not just among your family, but among your extended family, like your uncles, aunts, and cousins. And you're like, huh, I think we have a shared mental illness here or like a shared trauma. But none of you guys are willing to admit it.
Well, in case like this is something that I recently like has been shocking my brain. So it's like when your mom's mom, your maternal grandmother was pregnant with your mother, right? Like your grandmother or whatever, your mother. Let's say your mother to start. So when your grandmother was pregnant with your mother, she had all of the eggs that would eventually become you and your siblings. So it's like sometimes, even though you don't realize it, like you don't have that memory, you felt what they felt. And so that's why like generational trauma gets passed down in the blood. So think about it like this. If that was just, your one sibling, one whatever, or one aunt, one whatever, all of their children, that's all like shared. It is all shared. So it's like literally passed down in the blood. Isn't that fucking wild? The
Bro,
man was too stunned to speak.
this makes so much more sense now.
Doesn't it? Doesn't it? Like I literally everyone who listens to this podcast, like, and I know I kind of explained it in a convoluted way, but like that's the general thing is like it all comes from our maternal a lot of the times from our maternal grandmother. So it's like a lot of that trauma, a lot of that shit, it gets passed down. So
I understand now.
but no, I mean generational trauma and this film is definitely an example of generational trauma, like and I think that that's the thing that we did get that from the Spanish, which is not a good thing. We don't always talk about our shit, right? And we are so used to let's put everything under the rug. Like we don't deal with it. If we don't talk about it, we don't have to deal with it. Like, and it's like that just creates more frustration that is still in the blood that then gets carried on to the next generation. And I think that that's also why, like, a lot of us, like, not to say I'm young, but like a lot of the younger generations are like, no more. Like, we got to work through this, like, because we've just inherited so much of the like mental instability, like and we're just sick of just like living like everything fine, you know?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Is there anything else you want to talk about the movie? I think we kind of discussed everything.
I mean, I think we covered everything. The one thing that I was like Because have you ever been to Spain?
No, and this movie like affirmed my decision to go. Like it's like it was like the final push for me to take that trip next year. You know?
You should go, but I will warn you, because make sure that you always have hand sanitizer or
Ah,
soap and or toilet paper or wet ones because I went circa 2018. I called it my tour de colonizer because I went to Italy, Spain, and France,
bro.
and that was I mean, it's like truly the tour de colonizer. But that was the thing that I was just like, listen, like, when I go to Mexico or other like countries that are more developing, I'm like, okay, like you're gonna have to pay to use a bathroom to have toilet paper, like that's something you're gonna have to deal with. But in Spain, you're telling me in Spain, you guys don't have toilet paper? Like, ¿qué está pasando? Like, you know what I mean? So just like, and maybe it's because it was public restrooms. I don't know. But I'm just mentally prepping you for that. Better to
Okay.
be prepared than to get there and not have toilet paper.
That's a very
This is
good
me
tip.
looking out for you.
It's a very good tip. That's like life saving right there. That's something I
You're
know that
welcome.
the United States did better than the European countries. Like, although we don't have universal healthcare, we do have public restrooms that are free and are usually supplied with toilet paper. They may not be good toilet paper, but it's toilet paper and it's there most of the time.
So
So
yeah,
yeah,
that's just me looking out for you.
thank you. I appreciate that. I truly do. I truly appreciate that. Um, but yeah, you're saying what was the reason behind like have I ever been to Spain?
Oh, just the reason I asked that was just the seeing aspects of the culture are like, and you might think that's like it's not going to hit you, but it is interesting because one thing that was like that really kind of for whatever reason like hit a nerve. I was like, oh, what's that? And they're like, oh, that's a tortilla. I was like, that looks like a frittata. What you mean?
Ah,
And they're like, and so it's just like mentally prep yourself because it is kind of strange to like interact with people who many, whatever, were kind of like responsible for like, the colonization of, and so it's just interesting to see like the nuances, right? Like the things that we do have from the culture as opposed to the things that we don't have. So, and that was, I think, why I was also glad that I watched this film, like after going to Spain, after doing all this, because like had I watched Volver, I'd be like, oh, they have all those like fans. They must be so clean, And then I went there
ah.
and I was like, no, 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 no. And so, you know, don't let the films lie to you. It is very beautiful. It is very scenic. The cleanliness could be better. It's mid at best.
Ah. Mid. That's hilarious. I was gonna say something. Oh yeah. This is something I will defend until my dying breath. Spain Spanish sounds weird. And it like I there is this one Instagram reel of this one Spanish girl. She went into her car. She's like, and it cut to like a Latino guy. He's like, guys, I think this is your call to action because we don't make fun of Spain Spanish as much as we should. So if you haven't done it yet, make fun of your local Spanish guy for his Spanish. I was like, finally, a call to action, a call to arms.
But it's true that we don't criticize it. And then I will. Do you speak Spanish?
Yes. Sí, claro que
Okay.
sí.
Sí, sí. Okay, okay. So something I will get prepared for the patronizing. Hablas español muy bien. Hablas español because that had me fuming at times because I was just like. But at the same time, when Mexicans try to be really like, well, we don't understand what you're saying, I was able to be like, well, they understood me in Spain. So what's your problem?
All right.
So because I think that that's the thing is like the thing is with like sometimes our own people we're so critical, but it's like why do we give so much grace to the Spanish? Like that doesn't make sense.
It's like the poor man making fun of the poor other poor man because he thinks he'll be rich. It's like parallels,
Yeah.
man. Parallel
Yeah.
mothers.
Did you think we were going to get this nuanced on this episode?
I did not, and I'm glad we did.
Yeah.
I don't really have anything else as far as like the film, what I thought. I think I pretty much discussed everything. Unless you have one final thought.
As far as the film,
Yeah, it's like what you thought.
I mean, would recommend it. I would recommend it to people that particularly have maybe a complicated relationship with your mother, because I think it's sometimes nice to be reminded it could be so much worse, you know? And I think that this was a doozy of a mother-daughter relationship. You know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah. Oh yeah. Definitely for sure. A mother-daughter, granddaughter relationship for sure. Yeah, very good. I liked it. Hello everyone. I don't have a transition for this, but count this as the transition into discussing the production side. For those of you who don't know Spanish, volver means to return. And that's kind of like the plot in this film. It's like to return. The most obvious thing that happens is when the mother of Ramonda returns from the dead to be with her daughters at their time of need. What else as terms as like returning? It's like a
She
return to family.
Return to family. Also, I liked that the metaphor of, like, Raimunda, she's basically had her voice taken away, right? With like all these traumatic things that happened to her, and then she starts to sing again. And I thought that that
Yes.
was very like symbolic of like, oh, it is possible to regain your voice after like something tremendously awful has happened to you,
Yeah.
right?
I thought that was very beautiful. A very beautiful scene. And I learned on Letterboxd that it wasn't Penelope singing; she was dubbed from another singer, who sang for her in a place of the film. Let me see, what was her name again? It was a flamenco.
But that doesn't surprise me though that her voice was dubbed. Like I think that that's more common in film, is that they would rather just go with the sure bet than to go with oh, her name was Estrella
Morente.
Morente.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there we go.
Hmm.
Estrella Morente. I'm sorry, Estrella. I forgot. I should have done better. I should have prepared better for this. I'm really sorry.
Girl, you're a star. Don't you worry. We brought that.
And it's also concerning like the two women returning to the small village where they grew up and being confronted with like the superstitious beliefs that the family, like the village people believe, which is contrasting what they usually live in, like their urban city lives. You might know more about Almodovar as a director than I do, but he was complimented on his distinctive quality of his ability to write female characters, because there aren't many male filmmakers who of his generation who is able to write women who are multidimensional and compelling characters in their own right. It's something that's I read from this article from Movies Unchained, something that's defined his character and made him responsible for like very fascinating characters in cinema history.
That's so interesting. Well, he's an openly gay man, so I always
Right.
feel that, like, not always, but more often than not, I feel like there is a lot of gay men who tend to sympathize with the struggles of women. And I know that he was very close to his mother. I don't think she's still living, but they were very close. So I think he grew up with a lot of strong role models. So then he like just took what he saw, right? He's just like, okay, well, I've been around strong women my whole life, so I want that theme to be a running theme in my films.
It's a very noble thing for him to do, you know? I like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it a lot too. And that's actually why I wanted to have the redemption arc of, like, because I was just like, it seems like you're doing great things to uplift the culture and to really, like, because like you said, there aren't a lot of male directors that specifically focus on empowering women. And that was the thing too, is like all of these characters, right? Like they're all complex.
Right.
Um None of them were the same, like, and I don't know, like even with the terrible things that happened to them, they weren't necessarily traumatized by it in a way that it like took over their lives, so to speak.
Right.
It was like, this is a part of me. I've put it in a box and I've moved on, with like a lot of the different traumas that people were facing.
That's quite literally what Ramonda did with the body.
You're not wrong.
um yeah, like as you see in this film, Ramonda, like when she's cleaning up the blood in the apartment and her like the restaurant owner knocks on her door, she doesn't miss a beat to trying to buy the restaurant from him, even though there's a dead body in her kitchen. And she's like, hey, so how much you selling that restaurant for? Like, lady, And when she has the body in the freezer, a guy, like a local crew member, I think he's like the assistant director, whatever, comes by and says like, "Hey, can we eat food here?" And she's like, "Oh yeah, go ahead." Like not even asking for permission, just go ahead, and just taking the hustle. Like she's all about the grind, man. She's all about the grind.
I actually want to point out another thing with the scene with the restaurant owner. The fact that she has blood on her neck and he's like, "Did you cut
Yo,
yourself?" And she was like, "Woman troubles." And I'm like, "What the fuck, bro? What do you mean woman troubles? You didn't ask anything beyond. How do you accept that as like, that's a reason?" Like, you know what I mean? And I think that kind of goes along with the whole theme of like the women are strong, they don't miss a beat, they keep going. The men are kind of like, "Oh, I'm a doofus. Like, I have no idea. Women trouble. Women bleed from their neck. Okay, I'm not going to question it." And it's just like, I don't know. That was just something that I wrote down when I was like, "What do you mean?" That was like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm just like, what? It was very confusing to me.
yeah, it could be like one of either two things. Like he's like, "Oh, I'm not even gonna question that because I know something's up," or is like, or the second one, which I kind of believe more, he's just a doofus, and I believe that more
Yeah.
with this film. It was just really funny. Like, bro, that you're accepting that, like, just moving on from that, like, okay,
I think maybe that is something to say that like a lot of people, men specifically, like when they do ask questions like, "Oh, it's just women troubles," they don't want to know more. So, like for a lot of people, that's just okay, good, that's enough for me. That's good enough, you
it's good
know.
enough. And I don't hear it as often anymore, but like sometimes whenever a woman would get upset with someone, I've heard that someone would say like, "Are you on your period?" And I was like, "Why did you say that?"
And also, that's such a misconception because the reason that people with uteruses get so upset is because we have more testosterone in our body. So, what does that say about testosterone? Makes us aggressive. And you know who has a lot of testosterone?
The people who
I'll
start
just
wars.
exactly.
Yeah, okay. So moving on. So the origins of this film. So Volver was first developed by Pedro Almodovar based on a story the actress Marissa Paredes told him during the production of the 1995 film The Flower of My Secret, another film set in the La Mancha region. The story revolved around a heartbroken Puerto Rican man who opts to kill his mother-in-law in hopes of reuniting with his beloved wife, who left him and broke off contact at her mother's funeral. Owning a restaurant, he leaves it in his neighbor's care when he is about to kill his victim. And he was so fascinated by the story and his background, Almodovar decided on incorporating elements of it into the screenplay of The Flower of My Secret, making it the plot of the movie within the movie based on the main character's novel in the film. And while working on the script on Volver, he would resolve to settle on a character of the neighbor Ramonda as a film-centric character, while Emilio, the Puerto Rican, would eventually become the supporting role, which was the restaurant order. So it's kind of like, he's like, "No, we're just going to focus on Ramonda."
That's so interesting because I feel like that definitely. I love when there are ideas for something that, like, over time just completely evolve. Because I feel like this was probably the better storyline, in
Oh,
my
yeah.
opinion.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's something that you learn as a writer is that ideas are worthless. It's the execution that matters. And ideas are just like drafts, you know. And as he worked on it, he's like, "Huh, I got something better for the neighbor." And look what happened. We got Penelope Cruz wearing a fake butt.
Did she wear a fake butt?
It was a fake butt.
The more you know.
It was prosthetic. It was like fake, and he did that on purpose too. He's like he felt like the character would have like a butt like that. Penelope Cruz was first reported to have landed one of the starring roles in Volver, having previously worked with Almodovar in his films Live Flesh and All About My Mother. And in preparing for her role, she watched Italian neorealism films from the 1950s, many of them starring Sophia Loren and Claudia Cardinali, to study the Italian Maggiorate that Almodovar envisioned for her performance in the film. And I learned that Italian Maggiorate, which I still am a little confused as to what the word means, but from the context clues I gathered, it's referring to like those well-endowed Italian actresses from the 1950s. So people like Sophia Loren and Claudia Cardinali.
That checks out. Okay.
And Carmen Mora, the star of Almodovar's debut, Pepe Lucibon, and 5 additional films with the director, was the first to be cast in a film alongside Cruz. And her coming onto this film was the first collaboration with Almodovar after a period of 18 years and a reported fallout during the production of Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown. And Maura commented on the character as a very complicated role to play, which kind of amazes me. Like 18 years. This is like the first film she's working with him after 18 years after a fallout. I want to know what happened here. I don't know what happened. It must have been something huge that they had a fallout and never spoke to each other for 18 years.
I mean, yeah, because that's a good amount of time. I'll have to, if either one of us finds information on that, we have to share it with the other.
Yeah, it's like that you could have a baby and then raise it into a young adult at that time frame. Like, it's like, hey, how's Johnny? He was just born, right? Well, he just graduated high school. Huh, so we haven't spoken for that long, huh? Yeah.
It's been a minute.
And as far as the reception of this film, it premiered at the 2006 Cannes Film Festival, where it competed for the Palme d'Or and received critical acclaim and ultimately won 2 awards at the festival for Best Actress, which was shared by the 6 main actresses, and Best Screenplay. And Cruz was nominated for the 2006 Academy Award for Best Actress, making her the first Spanish woman ever to be nominated in that category.
I remember, and I think that was the reason I was so bummed about missing it too, is that like it did really well. Like it was rated really well in the United States. It was rated really well in different European countries. Like it just seemed like this is one of the ones that people really enjoyed, you know?
Yeah, I don't know why I didn't have it on my watch list either. Like this is like out of my radar. I only knew about, it was like a blip. If this is the circle right here, right? It was like on the edge of the circle, the blip of Pedro Almodovar. And it was like going farther away because I kept forgetting about him. And then you just happened to respond to my message on the Discord. I was like, oh, okay. I've heard about this film. I like Penelope Cruz because she was a Nacho Libre. And I love it. I love it.
See, divine timing is a wild thing. It'll hit you when it hits you.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. All right. So that concludes our conversation today. Thank you so much, Bex, for being here. I really appreciate you talking about this movie.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on and the opportunity. This has been great.
So was Volver a hit or a miss with you?
I think it was a hit. You know, like it wasn't exactly what I expected going in, but it did impress and I was happy with it.
So what were you expecting? I don't think I asked that earlier, but what were you expecting?
Well, I think I did touch on that a little bit. Like for whatever reason, I thought with like the mother coming back and everything, they were all going to like we're gonna
Oh, right.
generationally like handle this, but you know, like I kind of prefer it the way that it happened because it really has like Raimunda's like arc of like redemption, right? Like she's just like I have to do this for my daughter, but also for myself. You know, like I saw a lot of like I need to do this for myself.
Right. I remember you did mention that. My bad.
Yeah. No,
Okay.
you're good.
Anything you'd like to promote right here? Your podcast, your social media?
Yeah, you know, if you really enjoyed this conversation and getting into like generational trauma and just healing, I have a podcast. It's called Tu Tía Bruja. You know, we talk magic and a lot of the different traditions that, you know, we carry that like we don't always think about as magic, right? Like these are remedios and tes and all these things that we do just like instinctively. And, you know, so we talk about that. And just kind of like a little witchy life guide. You can find that wherever you listen to podcasts. And I'm at Tu Tía Bruja, spelt without the accent over the I because Instagram and Twitter be real limiting. But yeah, you can find me there or check out my website, bexbcaston.com. I am an editor, producer, and I'm always looking for collaborations.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So that's it for today, folks. You were listening to the Hit List Podcast. This was Season 5, Episode 10. My name is Jason. Until next time, cross off a new film from your list.
Bye.